Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Men You Love To podcast. I am Kat, and today my guest is Sean Carey. Sean Carey is a leadership speaker, a transformational coach, an entrepreneur, a dedicated dad, and a best-selling author of A Single Dad's Comeback: 6 Steps to Clarity and Resilience. With over 25 years of experience in the health wellness industry, Sean has built a career helping individuals strengthen their bodies, minds, and lives, but the most powerful work comes from the lessons forged through adversity. Sean, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me, Kat.
I so look forward to our conversation. We had a wonderful call, and we've come up with just some key points that I know you wanted to share with the listeners about your journey to becoming this man that I just read his bio. So, who is this man and how did he get here? I know that's a loaded question, um, but do you want to just maybe start at the beginning?
Yeah, I would love to start at the beginning. So, I could start back to my childhood, and you know, basically, I was an active kid. I grew up in a lower middle class family, became more lower class over the years. Um, when I was 12 years old, the same year my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer, and my dad, his company went on strike, and that was a moment where I learned something that I carried with me my entire life, which is, you know, life doesn't owe you anything and nobody is going to save you. And I didn't realize that, 30 years later, this lesson that I learned was going to have to be applied. So again, I was a very active kid. I was a successful athlete. Fast forward into after graduating from college, I got into the health and wellness field. I was a baseball player, so I continued, that experience and helping, athletes and people get healthy. And then I met my wife, and I actually met her at the first gym that I worked at. We started off as friends, and then eventually we started dating. And fast forward in 1998, we bought a house, we got married, and 2001 my son was born. Now, sounds like a great love story, and it did start off that way. In that same year, 2001, I opened my first training studio. Eventually, in 2003, I opened my first corporate wellness company. So I had, at one point, 18 corporate wellness centers, 2 personal training studios, and then I got involved in franchising. 2003, my daughter was born. So now I have this happy family. From the outside, it looks like a great family. I have multiple businesses. I have a beautiful wife. I have 2 amazing kids. I have a house that symbolizes success. As time goes on, my wife's driving a BMW. It's the everything except for the white picket fence. We didn't have a white picket fence. However, as time started to move forward, our family started to deal with something that it started off as, I guess, something that really was just recreational. And eventually our family got hijacked by alcoholism. And I use the term hijacked because it wasn't something that I personally was expecting. And as time went on, it got progressively worse. And in 2015, it all came to a breaking point. It was Christmas Eve, 2015. And just like we do every year, my kids and I, we decide that we're going to go to Christmas Eve Mass, then to my parents' house for Christmas Eve dinner. And my daughter loved going to my parents' house. It's something we always looked forward to. But this year, my wife decided that she was going to stay home. And in the process of doing that, alcohol at one point was occasional, and then it became every day, and then it became every day, all day. And we were at that every day, all day point. And we go to my parents' house, we laugh and we eat dinner and we exchange presents and we pretend everything is normal, right? Because that's what we do. We pretend. And then we drive home. And that moment we walk through the front door, I have this pit in my stomach, realizing we've walked right back into the chaos. And she's drunk and confrontational. The argument starts to escalate. And that's the moment that she turns on my daughter. And my son looks at me and says, Dad, I'm calling 911. This has to stop now. And he didn't say it as calmly as I'm saying it right now. And it's Christmas Eve. And I don't even stop him. I allow my 14-year-old son to have the courage to make the call that I should have made probably years earlier, but I continue to live in denial. Now, when I say I could have made the call earlier, I'm going to go back 3 months. 3 months earlier, I decided I had had enough. There was another incident at my son's football game, and it was alcohol induced. And I decided the next day I was going to go to the local courthouse and get a restraining order. Well, I went there. I spoke to the woman. So here I am. I'm at the time, I'm 6 feet tall. I'm like 200 and plus pounds. I walk into this domestic violence office and I have a conversation with this woman named Carey. She's a petite female counselor who's there to help. I explained to her the situation. She gives me some options. And one of the options was, perhaps you should get a restraining order. And my response was, restraining order on my wife? Like, is that something I really should be doing? Because I knew it would change everything. It would change our entire family. Now, with that being said, we have this mindset. When I say we, I at the time had it, and I'm sure many men have it as well, and some women have it as well. I think a lot of women have it. Is that I don't want to break up my family. It's going to be too much on the kids. If I just stay, okay, then everything will be okay. At least I can manage things. But I finally had to come to the realization: do I want my kids to live in a broken home, or are they going to be from a broken home? Because living in a broken home has no end. There's no recovery to that. You could just continue to live in a broken home. But if you are from a broken home, then you can start to heal. And so that's the next part of this story. But so I end up taking the paperwork and I don't file. I put it away, and fast forward back to Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve was on a Thursday. The police show up. I happen to know the supervisor on that evening. She and I grew up in the same town, same neighborhood. She asked, what do we want to do? I said, well, if you take her to the police station, she's going to be locked up from Thursday until Monday. And at the time, I'm still being sympathetic to the situation. All right. She's an alcoholic. She's my wife. She's the mother of my kids. But I'm at wit's end, let me tell you. And I say, take her to a mother's house. Well, the next morning, it's Christmas morning. We get up. She walks right back in the house as if nothing happened. And that was the moment I realized I need to take responsibility for what happens next. So then Monday morning, I get my paperwork. I go down to the courthouse, and it's 3 months since the last time I was there. And guess who's at the front desk?
Carey.
Yes, Carey's at the front desk. Of course she is. And she looks at me and she says, you're back. And I said, you remember me? She said, yes, I do. At the time, I couldn't tell you it was probably going to get worse, but I'm guessing it did. And I said, yes, much worse. And that was the moment that I told her I was going to fill out the paperwork. I went up, stood before the judge, handed the paperwork in. Next thing I know, I'm at my local police station filing the restraining order. They're going to execute it. And that afternoon, not that I wasn't acting as a single dad, but I officially became a single dad. And that's where the story. That's where the comeback story begins, but that's where the story of finally taking responsibility and doing what I should have done years earlier, but I didn't have the courage to do it. I allowed my 14-year-old son to make that call. And it changed everything moving forward. It changed the trajectory of our life. And maybe I'll let the cat out of the bag now, but in 2022, a week before my daughter started college, my then ex-wife, she died of alcoholism. So it was a long, drawn out, tragic situation that came to a very bad ending.
Thank you, Sean, for sharing all of that. And yeah, you hope that this has a good ending for everyone involved and she got help, but unfortunately this did not end well for her. And I'm really sorry to hear that, because I know that you lost your ex-partner and your children lost their mother. And the circumstances don't make a difference. They still lost their mother. So I'm really sorry for that.
Yeah, and it is. It's I will tell you, Kat, I went through a whole process of emotions, because I had been removed from the situation. She was dating somebody else. There was a lot going on. And I will tell you, I don't often talk about this anymore. I mean, I'm at a different place in my life now. It's for purposes of this discussion, the context of this is where I was. The guy that you introduced with all this great stuff. He's been through some shit, and there are a lot of guys out there doing the same thing right now. And what they're probably doing is exactly what I was doing. Is they're masking it. I don't want to say they're hiding from it, but when something goes wrong in your family, so we as men have been taught, or we're actually, we're made to lead and protect. That's who it is. And that's no disrespect to women, because women have their roles as well. And I think there's especially in a relationship, there's a synergistic relationship. There's a connection there. However, just genetically, that's why men are built the way they are, the things that they have. So for me, a lot of this was an embarrassment. Here I was, an entrepreneur, an athlete, well respected in the community. I had all of these things from the outside that looked great, and my family was falling apart inside. And I wasn't really doing anything about it. And it wasn't because I didn't know what to do. Let me rephrase that. It's not that I didn't know what to do, but I think I was afraid to lead through the pain, if that makes sense. And once I finally made that move to get the restraining order, that now turned everything around. And it also, it taught me what I needed to do, is that I needed to take care of myself first, so that I was fit for the duty of caring for, supporting, and leading the people that I loved the most and those I was called to serve. Now, at the time, I wasn't thinking that. This is me, this is the coach right now. But back at the time, it was just like, I just can't live like this anymore. I can't do this anymore. The anxiety, I put on, I'm 200 pounds now, and I'm fit and lean, and I went to 230 pounds. My blood pressure was 140 over 100. This is a guy who's been in the fitness and wellness industry. This is a guy who was the epitome of health. People, I trained rock stars and professional athletes, and here I was not even taking care of myself. And it's so easy to fall into that pit, that trap, where you put everybody else ahead of you because you think that's what you're supposed to do. And yes, you are supposed to do that as a man, but if you aren't taking care of yourself, you can't do that. You become, not only do you become a fraction of the man that you are, you can eventually become a burden on those that you love and serve. And that's the part that we sometimes miss, is that, if we come in and we're, burnt out and unhealthy and anxious and depressed, what are we doing for those that we love and lead?
Right. You have so much wisdom, Sean, and it's all been earned. Um, I know you had to go through a lot to earn this. I don't want to make you go back in time, but I do. I really want to talk about that period of time because I see where you are now, but I really want to talk about that period of time of where you were in denial, of when there was so many red flags with the drinking and the things that were getting out of hand, and how it was affecting you and the children. But there was the embarrassment and the shame around it and the feeling like a failure and wanting to keep up the image of the perfect family. And I want to talk about that because I feel like so many men and just so many families are stuck in this state of we're just going to keep things the way they are because if we acknowledge one fucking thing, then it's all going to fall apart. And then we have no control over how bad it gets. Um, and I just want you to spend some time talking about some of the red flags. And maybe if you can tell me what your definition um, early was about alcoholism and how you have changed your definition of what an alcoholic is, or if you have. Because I also think there's a lot of misconceptions about what an alcoholic is. And I think that keeps us locked in denial because we're like, it's not every day, or they still have a job. And we have these criteria that we look at. And as long as the person's not in all of them, then we're like, they're okay, right? And we go on for another couple of years. Can you just touch on that?
Yeah, so that's a great point, and there's a lot to unpack here right now. So I'm gonna start with what an alcoholic is, because I think that's the easiest way for me to work backwards. So this was back in probably 2006 when it really started to become apparent. So remember, 2006, 2015, she gets out of the house. 2022, she dies. So there's a long time. There's a time frame there that's pretty extensive. So what I would say is this: first of all, in no way do I think that alcoholism is something that's just, oh, they're just an alcoholic. No, it's a serious disease. So let's make that clear once and for all. And living with an alcoholic is chaotic. There's manipulation, there's lies. Now, while it was happening, I'm thinking that it's intentional. I think she's doing this to our family. She's trying to destroy our family. But what I come to realize later on, especially after taking a step back and going through the steps of grief and regret and even forgiveness, something I had to do. And it took me a while to get to that place. However, what I realized is that nobody wants to be an alcoholic. Like, can you imagine getting up every day and that's what your life revolves around? But because it becomes such an addiction and it overtakes their life, that's all they're looking for. So they'll do anything to have their drink. And at some point they have to have their drink, because if they don't, they can have seizures and there's all kinds of other stuff that goes on. But I was thinking, it's just like, why doesn't she just stop? Why doesn't she just go get help? And then at a certain point, you work so hard to try to change that person that you eventually just throw in the towel. And I was at that point. That was the Christmas Eve point. I was like, you know what? I'm not dealing with this anymore. Like, make this be somebody else's problem. But really, she's still the mother of my kids. So there's interactions, and there were things that even after the divorce, I mean, we were dealing with all kinds of stuff. I showing up at events and the kids didn't want her there, but the kids wanted her there, but didn't want her there because they knew what it was going to be like. I'm embarrassed because she comes showing up. She's a fraction of the woman that I had married, but it's not something she wanted to have happen. I can say that now, almost 10 years removed, but in the moment, it's hard and you're embarrassed. So again, for me, the process of understanding what it is, and I'm not going to get into the the science of alcoholism, but I've done some really some studies. And matter of fact, when we were going through all of this, my kids were able to have somebody they could talk with. They were talking to a therapist, and their therapist recommended a book to me. It was called Stop Walking on Eggshells. And it talked about the correlation between bipolarism and borderline personality disorder, BPD, and alcoholism. And I'm reading this book, and Kat, when I tell you, I'm like, holy crap. Oh my, like it
I
was like
get it.
it was like boom, boom, boom. Like this is my life. This is what I'm dealing with right now. And that was an eye-opening read for me back in the day. Now, did it change the fact that I was still dealing with all this? No, but it did give me a little bit of understanding of maybe why things were going the way they were going. Because when you're in the moment, you don't want to deal with this. It's so I think that was part of it. The part for me, the embarrassment part is something that I still think about, is that I was embarrassed for my kids because we were at different events, and things would happen. And again, I hate going back and talking about this because I feel like I'm rehashing something that she's not even here to defend herself on. But anybody who's dealt with an alcoholic knows what it's like. I'm not making this up. This is the real life stuff. But it actually, it gives me a little bit of, pause to think back about this, and what could I have done differently? Now, having gone through biblical counseling myself and spoke with therapists, there's nothing I could have done differently. I think that's the part that we have to understand. So if somebody's going through something similar right now, it's not anything you can do. You can't change that person. And I lived through this mantra. This was a mantra I told myself 100 times, 1,000 times. Okay. I control my own actions and behaviors and my responses to the actions and behaviors of others. I had to drill that into my head, because every time I wanted to go and change something else, and I still do that even as a parent. As a parent, I like sometimes my kids, they're young adults now, and they're both amazing kids. But my son is a lot like me, and he's an entrepreneur, and he's very driven and very passionate and full blown ADHD, and like we butt heads, and then sometimes I have to take a step back and say, wait, hold on. You can only control your own actions and behaviors, and sometimes they have to learn for themselves. Now, when you're watching somebody slowly commit suicide, because I think that's what alcoholism is, and anybody who wants to argue with me, I can tell you August 21st, 2022 was the day she passed away. That's suicide. Okay. Not the conventional suicide, but you're slowly drinking yourself to death. And I think for me, I think that was the hardest part, is wondering, like, what could I have done differently? And again, like I said, there was really nothing I could have done differently. Well, let's rephrase that. I'm sure there were some things I could have done differently early on. But as time went on, I focused so much on protecting my kids. That's how I ended up losing myself in the process, because I was protecting them from a lot of things. I was protecting them from the disease. I was protecting them from the embarrassment. I was protecting them from the heartache. When mom says she's going to show up and she doesn't show up, or when mom shows up and she's drunk and it, and you can smell it all over, and she looks at you and she lies to you. Well, she's not doing that because she's an evil person. She's doing that because she's protecting her addiction. But it's not our responsibility to protect her addiction for her, because then we become enablers. And I think for me, that was the other part of it. It's like, where's the balance between understanding, being an enabler, and not wanting to live like this anymore? And that's a tough balance. And as time goes on, eventually gets to the point where, there's no more understanding and there's no more enabling. There's just, I don't want to live like this anymore.
Yeah. And what you just described, there's millions of families going through that. Um, and I shared with you on our first call that I am the daughter of an alcoholic. My father was an alcoholic, and so I grew up with this idea of if I just love him enough, or then give him tough love, or if I stop talking to him, there's something I'm going to be able to do to make him stop. And what you just said was like, yes, there's nothing you could have done to make her stop drinking. You could have changed things for you and your kids and the overall situation. But as far as her addiction, there's nothing you could have done. And it's so hard to realize that someone that you love, their primary relationship becomes alcohol. You like they are your primary relationship and you have relationships with this person, but their primary relationship and their primary focus is now this substance. And that's heartbreaking for everyone involved. So
In my
thank you for sharing
in my
that.
journaling, I actually wrote, and I think you probably relate to this, is that the words I think I used and trying to recall is, we're no longer fighting with each other. We're fighting the addiction that's taken over the person that we love.
Right.
And when you think of it that way, I guess it puts everything in perspective in that, yes, there's nothing you can do. And I mean, you can't hate this person, even though there were times when I hated who she had become. I had to bring myself to the fact that nobody wants to live like this. How could you?
Mhm.
You don't want this. You don't wake up one morning and say, "Hey, you know what? I want to be an addict, or I want to be an alcoholic, or I want to be whatever whatever is going to destroy myself and my family." And I think that's part of the part of the challenge.
Absolutely. And every person has their own different reasons, but at the end of the day, no one consciously chooses to have that type of lifestyle and is killing themselves slowly. A choice.
Yeah, and I would hear, well, she's choosing to drink. Well, at this point, she's not choosing to drink.
Right.
It's part of her life. It's no different than it's like somebody that gets up every day and brushes their teeth. That's just what you
Yeah.
did every day. Um, what to go to your point, and that for the longest time, because I wanted to isolate and I didn't want to tell anybody. I didn't realize that it was going on around me, and I was a coach. I was a baseball guy, as I told you. I also coached a lot, so I had teams that I coached, AAU teams, and there were three other men that were coaching in the same league that I didn't even know were all single dads for the same reason I was a single dad.
Wow.
And it wasn't until we had conversations later on. And what I started to realize is that, and this is what, prompted me to start my men's coaching group and the Iron Circle Brotherhood and all the things that go along with it, is that you can't do this in isolation. Like, even if you try, at some point you need other men. And here's the thing: as long as you're around other men who are as honest and vulnerable and authentic as you are, because here's the problem: is we lie to ourselves. I'll look right in the camera and I'll say, guys, we're liars, right? People by nature lie, but men, we do even more because we think that if we hide it, then it'll go away, or that if I recognize it and then I become emotional about it, well, then I'm not masculine about it. I should be able to take care of this myself. No, nobody needs to be in isolation. Nobody needs to do this on their own. What you need is other supportive men, but not yes men, men who are going to actually call you out on your own bullshit. And that's what I ended up doing. I started surrounding myself with men who challenged me, who challenged my theory when I started blaming. And they're like, well, yeah, you can certainly blame, but if you want to sit in your own poop all day, then that's what you're going to do. But if you want to change your diaper and you want to start taking responsibility, your life will look differently. And I think that's the hard part, is that we think that we're the only one going through it, especially when we're going through it. Or we think that if we tell somebody that we're going to be judged, and you know what, maybe you will be judged,
Mhm.
but then that's not your guy, that's not your crew, that's not your tribe.
Right. I think that isolation and that feeling of being the only one dealing with it just further compounds the issue. Um, I personally think that alcoholism is at its worst because it's so easily accessible. It is so acceptable. And I don't think people realize that everyone talks shit about other drugs, like, and calls people druggies if they do other drugs. There's such a stigma. But then when you drink alcohol, you're just like a regular person because everyone drinks. If you've been on any dating sites, everyone wants to go for a drink. And if you don't drink, you're like, well, I guess I can't do anything because everyone's drinking. Um, but I think people don't realize that alcohol is the only substance from which the withdrawal symptoms can kill you. There is no other substance, not as harsh as there are outside, like out there, that can kill you from its withdrawal symptoms, but alcohol can. And I think so many people are just blind to that. And that's how I think things get out of control. Um, I know I asked you like four questions at the same time, but can we just go over the red flags of,
Yeah.
and then we can move on of the things that you didn't notice, because that's one of the things I want people to hear is like these red flags, they're not little things. They're big things, and you need to be aware of them and you need to pay attention so you don't end up dealing with a life-altering event.
Yeah, for sure. So I no longer drink, but I was a social drinker in the past, and we were social drinkers, especially when we'd go out, wine, a beer. I was never a hard alcohol person, so it wasn't abnormal for us to have alcohol in the house, and it wasn't abnormal for my then wife to drink wine. But what I did, they had this little groups. I don't know if you used to see these things on social media. Mommy needs wine or mommy needs.
Mommy wine culture.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's like cool and it's fun, and they get together and they do play dates or whatever the heck they do. I don't know, but the whole idea of it's a social event, and I think it did start off that way. Now, the challenge and the thing that scares me as well is that there was some alcoholism in her family, and now there's alcoholism in my family because of her and her family. Uh, but with that being said, I didn't really think of big deal. It was that kind of stuff. Now, I was in franchising at the time around 2006. I told you it was when it really started to recognize it. And I was traveling. I'm in Rhode Island. I would travel to Denver, Colorado once a quarter to meet with my franchising mastermind group, and I would go there for 3 or 4 days at a time, and then I come back. I started realizing that there was bottles of wine that were no longer like in the fridge; they were like in the cupboard, and they were a little bit bigger than normal. And then one day, I realized that I went into the side drawer next to the bed, and the nightstand, and there was a box of wine. I'm like, oh, what is this doing here? So I mentioned something. I said, like, what's that here? Oh, when you're not home, I just if I'm watching a movie or something, I just, I just pour myself a glass of wine, and I'll usually, if the kids are, so I don't wake the kids up, I'll stay in bed and watch it. Well, little by little, it started to happen, right? So I'd be going back. So then I started actually, when I'd go away, because this is what you do as the alcoholic's spouse or as the kid, and you probably already know what I'm going to say. Is I started putting I got the Sharpie out, right? But I make little marks where you couldn't see them, and you'd watch, and there were times when this full jug of wine, I put the mark, at the top, like I knew it was full, and I put the little mark there, and the next time I looked, there was a new bottle, and it was like halfway done, and there was no mark on it. So I started going, oh man, this is not good, But I kind of left it be, and then we weren't big social people, but we had friends and family that we would go to places with, and now fast forward to 2010, we were out to dinner with another couple and their kids, and we went to one of those hibachi restaurants. You do the Japanese hibachi, and we had a reservation. It was probably in the evening, like say 6 o'clock, just not exactly sure, but And we get there. And now I know that it's a Saturday and I know that she's been drinking all day. We get to the restaurant, we finally get to the hibachi, and she has one glass of wine and she's gone. And her friend, who is somebody she's been friends with a lot, it's like, oh my gosh, she's such a lightweight. And I'm like, I don't say anything, but we realize that, this becomes habitual. So you start at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the morning. And, by 6 o'clock at night, everybody else is just having their first glass of wine and you're on your 10th. It becomes a problem. So things like that started happening. And then the lies, the lies and the manipulation. And those are the things you start looking for. So now you start going on like a wild goose hunt, so I'm just looking for different things. And so I think the red flags were things like that. And then eventually, the wine isn't enough anymore. So what do? They go to a next level. So it becomes vodka. So vodka is easy. It's easy to conceal. You take vodka and you put it in a Poland Springs bottle and it looks just like water, right? And now at that point, I know what's going on. I mean, I'm not oblivious to it. Now, a lot of people outside have no idea. All of her friends think that she's just a lightweight and she's lived in a really bad marriage, and the guy she's married to is verbally and physically and emotionally abusive. But then eventually the truth comes out. So the same family that we're with for dinner, about 6-8 months later, my son is at their house sleeping over, having a sleepover, and he just has a meltdown. And my son's not one to tell people things like that. He was like me, kind of keeping the house. And he tells the mother of his best friend exactly what was going on. And she had no idea. All of the friends had no idea. And I think that's what happens is it's an easy way, as you said, to go back to your original thing. It's socially acceptable. That's my worry about marijuana now. It's becoming legal and it's socially acceptable. So everybody's doing it everywhere else, but they don't think about the effects. And it's not just the effects on the person doing it. It's the effects on the people around them. Now you're driving. I mean, I can tell you, Kat, there were so many times, and I God, protect me for saying this, but that I wish that she would hit a telephone pole because I was so afraid that she would cross the center line and hit somebody else. And now 2 families would be destroyed. So those were kind of the red flags. And then eventually, it becomes full blown. And now we know. But I think the thing that as if you're a man, even if you're a woman listening to this and your husband or your boyfriend is an alcoholic, is that don't deny what's really going on. Like if it walks like a duck and it squawks like a duck and it swims like a duck, it's a duck, right? But we want to give them the benefit of the doubt, And here's the thing: there are so many people right now walking around who are functioning alcoholics that it's, and the next level is even higher than that. So what I've found is that it's not a disease that is going to get any better unless you stop. Like it's progressive. And I had a friend who in his day, he was an alcoholic and he ended up becoming a very successful businessman here in Rhode Island. He owned like a bunch of automotive stores, and he still admits to it. He was an alcoholic back in his day, in his 30s. I saw him at the dry cleaners when he was probably in his mid 70s, and he knew that me and my wife were married because he used to come to the gym that we started at. I tell you, I met her at the gym, and he asked me, he says, "Hey, how is Jennifer doing?" And I said, we're divorced. And he's like, "Oh, really? I thought you guys would have been together forever." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, Walter, she had the same issue that you had when you were younger." And he said, "Whoa." He said, "Let me tell you something. If it's something that if you either stop or you get worse, but you don't get better because you say, I'm going to just cut back. It doesn't work that way." Yeah. And I think that's the other thing we need to look for is if you start to see those red flags, do the best you can to try to get somebody help, encourage them to get help. But at the end of the day, they have to decide to do it themselves. I think that's the challenge I had. And I will, I told you I was gonna be totally transparent. I mean, there were days when I was verbally abusive about it. Like where I was like to the point where I was like, you're destroying our freaking family. Da, da, da. I'm not proud of those moments. And I don't like some people could say, well, you caused her to drink more because of that. Well, maybe I did, maybe I didn't. She was going to drink either way. But you get to the point where you get so anxious and so uh, upset about the situation that it drives you crazy. Like that's how I lost myself. I didn't lose myself because I became a single dad. I lost myself because I felt like I was living in a room with no doors. I felt like there was no way out of this thing. I mean, for 3 years, I lived in the basement and slept on an air mattress because I needed to protect my kids. What really I could have made the phone call before that, but these are the things that we do. These are the red flags that we see. These are the ways that we cover up and we minimize and we make excuses and we blame. And what ends up happening? It only gets worse. I think that's the part. If I were to give anybody any advice, is to understand that you control your own actions, behaviors, and responses to the action behaviors of others. But early on, if you see something that doesn't seem right, it's probably not.
I can hear the accountability in your voice for the way that you were starting to act and the parts of you that were coming out. And I think that's another red flag is if you are becoming someone that you are not, if your nervous system is hijacked by another person, if you don't feel safe in your home anymore, right? Like if you're just turned into someone else, and it goes back to what you said in the beginning, that your family was hijacked by alcohol, then that's another huge sign. And and yeah, I think thinking that, oh, I'll cut down or I'll only drink in the weekends is ignorant and it never works. And I think that's part of the manipulation that happens when people first start to say, hey, I feel like you have a problem with alcohol, you're drinking too much, I don't like it. The first response is like, oh, I'll cut down to, 2 beers instead of four. Or, oh, like I'll only drink on the weekends, I won't drink during the week. There's always that manipulation with acting like you can control it when the truth is that you cannot, and it is going to get worse over time. So I think it's super important that you brought that up. Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean that applies to any addiction, whether it be food or sugar or like we only we talk about drugs and alcohol, but the other thing is, like we said, it's socially acceptable. So the other thing was, well, you drink, so why are you telling? You can't tell me not to drink, but I don't drink to the point where I fall down a flight of stairs. So now you're trying to rationalize with an irrational person, and that doesn't work either. So yeah, I mean I stopped drinking just a little almost 2 years ago, and it wasn't like I stopped drinking like, oh, I got to stop drinking. Every year I do something. So I gave up coffee 3 years ago. I gave up alcohol 2 years ago. I gave up sugar this year. Like there's just things, and I just do things because I like to do things that are difficult because I can and because I want to challenge myself. But not everybody can do that. Some people, will need help to do it. So
Well, I commend you because I know how difficult that is. And I've quit smoking, I've quit drinking, I've quit coffee as well. And I'm going to say, like, coffee was one of the hardest ones. I know it sounds so crazy, but again, everyone has coffee. Everywhere you go is coffee. So it's like when you don't drink coffee, you're just a loser. Um,
well, not to get into my coaching mode, but like I don't know what you did, but for me, so I have a Yeti mug I used to put my coffee in the morning, and I'm an early riser, so I would have it. So what I did is I kept the Yeti cup, but I switched to decaffeinated tea, because the old saying is if you're gonna get rid of one habit, you need to replace it with another habit. You got to fill that void, and same thing with alcohol. So when I decided I was going to stop drinking, it was January. I do what's called a Daniel fast with my church every January. So it's a 21-day Daniel fast, and I won't get into the details, but you're giving up pretty much anything that's not like natural. So you nuts and berries and that kind of stuff, drinking water, but there's no caffeine, no alcohol, nothing. So when I gave up the alcohol. I was like, oh, I'll just do it for the 21 days. But I had actually stopped on Christmas because I was like, oh, I'll go to the end of the year and then I'll give the 21 days. And then the 21 days were up and I was like, oh, I'm just going to do dry January. And then I said, well, you know what? I'll wait till St. Patrick's Day. I'm half Irish. I'll have a Guinness on St. Patrick's Day. And then here's the funny thing is that I didn't really want anything. And so on St. Patrick's Day, I realized that they make zero Guinness. So I had a zero Guinness. And now from this point on, like I'll have an athletic. So when everybody else is doing their thing, I'm still part of the group, but nobody even knows because I tell them to put it in the glass. So it looks just like what it is. And at the beginning, I did it because I really didn't want them to know.
Yeah.
But now I'm kind of proud of it. But I will go back one more time because here I go getting off topic. But you were talking about dating. So one of the interesting things is, I don't go around and say to everybody, "Oh yeah, I'm a single dad because my ex-wife was an alcoholic." Like they know that I'm divorced, and then not until later on do I tell them, I share with them because it's something that they might need to know.
Right.
But I don't. I go on a date now, and I don't drink. And at the beginning I felt like I needed to explain myself. Oh, you want to like now I just go, yeah, I don't, I don't drink, but you're more than welcome to have,
Right.
whatever you want, and I'll just have, a soda water with lime, or I'll have an athletic IPA or something like that. And at the beginning, I will tell you, it was a little uncomfortable because I felt like I needed to explain myself, and but now I don't. Like I couldn't care less now.
Yeah. You
But
almost have to say like if you're in recovery or like what the reason is because they're like, oh, you must be a recovering alcoholic or like, oh, there's like this big reason, like you have liver disease, right? Like you can't just say I don't drink without needing to have this big explanation.
So I
So
just thought that would be interesting because you did mention this, the
yeah.
dating and that whole aspect. And I like I say, I may go back and have a drink one day, may
Mhm.
not. I don't know, but at this point, it's kind of become a game for me. It's like I'm just going to keep going and going and going. Like I like streaks, so I'm just going to keep doing it that way.
Right. I drink like at weddings. I'll have like I think I had like two drinks at a wedding in 2025, and that's about it. So I'm not like um like I'll never have a drink again, but there's got to be like a huge reason. And usually the next day I'll remember why. Like even the smallest amount, you can notice how it affects you. When you drink regularly, you don't really notice how much it affects your mood, your gut health, like your energy levels and everything like that.
And your choices. I mean, let's face it. It's they call it spirits because that's what it does. It changes your mood, and you make decisions that are otherwise probably you're saying beer goggles or like
Yeah,
you get drunk, then they'll never dance until they get drunk, right? What
right.
happens? But again, I'm not sitting here judging anybody. I'm
Mhm.
just sharing for purposes of our
Right.
discussion. I'm sharing our story, and if our story can help another man or even a woman who's going through this, I think it's important. And ironically, I did tell you that you mentioned my book, Single Dad's Comeback. Uh, it's amazing how things happen. So I was at a men's retreat, and one of the gentlemen I was actually sitting right next to, we were all sharing in a group, and it was a tribal group, and he started talking about his addiction, and he's an alcoholic, and he was 1 month sober, and he was starting to talk a little bit about why he wanted to stay sober because he had a young family, and something just compelled me to say to him. I looked at him and I said, Lewis, I'm your wife. And everybody in this circle just looked at me like, what is he talking about? I said, I feel you, brother. I know what you're going through because that was you're my wife, and I'm your wife. So what your wife is going through right now, I completely understand. And what you're going through is what my wife was going through. I said, but I want to give you something. So after the retreat was over, I gave him a copy of this, and he and his wife read it together. And I saw them at church, and his wife came to me, and she just thanked me, and she had tears in her eyes, and she's like, you may have, and I don't, he's still sober now. You may have changed our life. And I think that's really what it's all about. That's why you do this podcast.
Right.
That's why I coach men. That's why I'm sharing my story, is because there's one person out there, or maybe more, but there's somebody who's going to listen to
Yeah.
this podcast, and it's going to change their life, and it's going to change their family, and it's going to create a generational legacy because of that. And I think that's the part that we miss when we do things like this. Everybody wants to hear about the highlights and the lowlights, and who wants to sell their product and who wants to sell their coaching and all the other things that go on that. But at the end of the day, you and I are doing this because we're called to help other people. We're not doing this for any other reason than because we want to serve. And obviously, when we serve others, the law of reciprocity brings it back to us. And it may not be in our time, it may be in his time, but it will come back. So I just felt like I needed to share that story.
Thank you. That's such a beautiful story. And I have no doubt that you changed that family's life. And as you were talking, I was like, you changed future generations. And I forget what actress it was. And she said, the only thing that I had to do to change the future generations in my bloodline was not to become an alcoholic like my parents were. Just that one thing alone, to not be one, you've now not passed on that trauma that was passed on to you. So, and I agree with you. I do this, and I wanted to have you here because I think this is a huge issue that a lot of families are struggling with, and that they are really silent about, and they feel really isolated with. And I just want to commend you for your courage to speak up about this. I know it's extra difficult for men to talk about it. I also think that there is pressure for women and so much acceptance for women to be drinking. Like, I don't even want to get into that. But I think there's a lot of men that are struggling with this. And no one seems to be talking about it. So thank you so much, Sean. And if you had to say one thing to a man right now that feels like he is in this situation and he just realized that this might be a huge issue, what do you think the number one thing is for him to do? The first step.
The first step is to live in the truth. Like, stop lying or sugarcoating or blaming, and take responsibility. Because in my entire framework, the number one thing is responsibility. The first step in the 6 steps to clarity and resilience are take 100% responsibility for where you are. But you may not have put yourself there directly, but that's where you are. And that's where you have control. You have control from this day forward. You can't go backwards. Okay? The choices that you made got you to where you are, but the choices that you're going to make and the choice that you make today is going to determine where you will go.
100%. There's no way I could have said it better than that. The truth. Right?
Transformation only happens in
Right.
the truth, Kim.
Yeah, I love that. Sean, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your wisdom. You are an extraordinary father, and your children are so lucky to have you as their dad.
Well, I'm lucky to have them as my kids as well. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.